think I wrote about, where he wanted to own land. So Ozarks, bought 100 acres of land, put a double wide trailer on there. And then during the hunting season, he would hunt, and then he'd fill up the freezer, and then he would go to sea. But his wife ran also a small shop in town. And so they always had these sort of multiple incomes coming in, a portfolio, which is now what we talk about a lot, right? About creating a portfolio of activities. And one of the, for the book, one of the really wonderful places I went to was in Pittsburgh, and it's a nonprofit organization for machinists. And it teaches anybody of any age, but they're mostly young people, oftentimes people coming out of the military. So they're probably in their late 20s, early 30s to become machinists. And the instructors were in their 80s because they had lost all the machinists that were in their 60s because the pay is so good and the demand was so great that they all left. And so the instructors were in their late 70s, early 80s, and none of them expected to ever be a teacher. That wasn't just part of their thought process. And yet they all loved being a teacher, and they all loved passing on their knowledge. And the thing is, the machinists did not call themselves skilled labor. They called themselves artists, because what they created was art. And, you know, when I sat down with one of them and we had this conversation, the first thing he did, he's pulling off this plastic for the medical industry, little that he had created, and then some other things that he had built. And then after a while, we had this conversation and he goes, you know, Chris, I like you. Okay, I do. So if you want to know how to make really good red wine, and then he goes through this whole process. You get the grapes from Napa Valley, and you don't ferment them in your garage for 3 months. You do it for 6 months. And then the real trick is you add a little bit of blackberry brandy. And so, you know, you're getting these stories. You have to remember that. But you're getting these stories, and it's all about giving back, how much they loved working with the students, how much they loved passing on their knowledge, and they're still engaged. And one of them, for example, was also working at Costco. And I said, why are you working at Costco? And he says, well, you know, here's the thing. I'm the guy that's handing out the food at Costco. Now, everybody wants to talk to the person that's handing out food. So he says, you know, I have a great weekend. I talk to people. Another guy was on this thing where he would go to the flea markets on the weekends. And, you know, he was really proud. He'd bought 40 DeWalt tools. They are lacking batteries. And he bought them for $1 and he sold them for 10. He's 78 years old. Again, it was fun. And so I think that one of the things that we have to be very careful of in this whole conversation is that it's about skill and engagement. Education helps, but you can be highly educated in a career, but not necessarily have a lot of formal degrees.
Well, Chris, I stand before you as a shining example of somebody learning a new skill. 6 years ago, when I retired from being a financial advisor and thought I would start coaching people about planning for retirement, my son told me I had to have a website. Well, I had no idea of how to create a website, but he did. And I created my first website, and then a gentleman in a class I was in told me how to do a PowerPoint presentation, and there we were. I took off and never looked back. So everything we've done with Encore, it goes back to the website, the PowerPoint, and the ability to, it gave me to engage with people. And now today we have Zoom, and I think there's 25, 30 people on this call. That so yeah, I think there are a lot of people who are able to learn new things and create. But you know, you make the point in your book that with the aging of the U.S. population, employers will need older workers. It's not like they can afford to just ignore them because of their knowledge and experience, and we aren't creating a lot of new young people because of the decline in our birth rate. So you quote several economists and leaders in human relations that, in fact, older workers are the key to increasing U.S. productivity and prosperity. Not an afterthought, key.
Yeah.
Would you comment?
So, and this is so in 15 years, and only in 15 years, for the first time in US history, there'll be more people 65 years and older than 18 and under. And, this is a long-term trend, and the workforce is aging, and that is an underlying trend through the tragedy and the trauma that we're going through right now. And so in the pre-COVID world, if you're looking toward the end of 2019, when the unemployment rate was down around 3.5%, you were starting really by that point to really, in the surveys, to sort of see a real sea change in management's attitude. Now, it's going from an attitude of looking at their experienced workers and wondering, when are you going to retire, to starting to say, if this person retires, there's a lot of knowledge and experience that goes out the door, and I'm having trouble hiring people. How do I keep this worker around?